Hi, I'm Lane, and I'm going to be reporting on the Ellen Davis and Wendell podcast. So Ellen Davis leads this discussion, and she talks about how the point of her topic is going to be reframing the human relationship with the natural world, and that basically means what humans can do to strengthen their relationship with the land that we live on. She has these approaches that I picked up on. I noticed that the way that she approaches the Bible, she goes into a much more detailed and deeper meaning of everything she reads. She also discusses a lot of practical theology, which is another approach. And then she has a very genuine interaction with the Bible when she's reading it about how people can value and care for the world just by living in it. So those are like the main approaches that I took away from this, and I'm going to explain more now. So she starts off with the quote from Wendell Berry, I rest in the grace of the world and I'm free. And I feel like this kind of sets up not only a interaction with the podcast, but an approach on how to read the Bible as well. Just being able to rest in the grace that God has given. And it's not something that's super strict. It's not something that you have to be so worried about. It's just knowing that the grace is there, and that from that, we can learn how to care for the things around us. She talks a lot about the Old Testament Hebrew Bible and their care for the land. The writers of that specific Bible had so much detail about the characteristics of the land, and she brings up how today we kind of seem oblivious to our land that we live on, except if you're very specialized in that area. And that kind of brings her into the next point about just understanding that in a deeper level. Then she goes into the 7 days of creation and what it really means to have dominion over the land. In that part, she talks about exercising skilled mastery, which is a new approach for me. Like when she explains it, that's something that I definitely learned on how to approach the Bible and interpret it, because she explains how exercise skilled mastery isn't just controlling the land or deciding what to do with it. It's using what we are capable of as humans to actually care for the land and actually help it. Us as humans, we're the only creature that knows that every other creature on the planet has to eat and has to live, and it's our job to exercise what we're skilled at doing. That's definitely, I would say, an approach to the Bible that you can use, not just talking about land, but in everything. If there's an order, it's not necessarily about how much you can control what God has given in the world around you, but more how can you exercise what you're good at to benefit it. Then she goes into talking about eating and drinking and how that is actually a practical theology. And this approach is something that when you eat or drink, or you're even thankful for your food, like when you have a blessing over your food, a lot of the times people aren't thinking to the deeper meaning of what it means to actually have food there. So a lot of the times we either don't pray a blessing over our food, or we just think about it being at the table. What Davis brings up is how much work it took to actually get there, and how that could be similar to the Bible as well, how much there's actually there to one single sentence or to one plate of food, just kind of like the overarching process of it being there. I do have a slight disagreement during this part, a little bit of a reflection. So she talks about how the best way, or the only ways that we are connected with God physically, like we feel connected with God mentally and spiritually and emotionally, but we often don't feel connected with God physically on like a physical level. She talked about the only ways that we can do that is through sexuality and eating, which is fair, which is true, but something that I've learned is that we are made in the image and likeness of God. So that is a connection right there. Being made in his image is actually a physical connection as well. So maybe she thinks of that about that too, but just didn't mention it. But that's one thing that definitely caught my attention and I wanted to comment on. And then so she moves into kind of like our hope and value and care for the world towards the last part of the topic, which is a whole other approach that you can interpret throughout the entire Bible. Like you can look at every single book and just be like, okay, how can I make myself better to care for what God has given? And I really like this quote. She starts this kind of topic with how we see the world is how we learn to value it, which I think is something very true. And you can look at that in terms of the Bible as well. You can, if you see the Bible or see the world as something that is just a job to be taken care of, you're not really going to value it for what it could be worth to you. And I think that's just kind of an overarching quote that she had. She also then brings in, so her health of the land is like with eating is like a practical theology. I don't know if I exactly mentioned that, but also like another way that I thought about practical theology and a new interpretation of the Bible is how your relationship actually like can coincide with God if you have a healthy relationship with the land and a healthy relationship with God. And I thought of that as like a more physical, practical thing that you can do by taking care of yourself and the land around you, that's actually increasing your relationship with God as well. And then kind of going back to that exercising of skilled mastery, she talks about the possession of land. And once again, using that new approach, instead of just possessing land, actually caring for it and having like putting value into it. And it's the same thing if you interpret the Bible. Like you can look at the Bible, you can read the whole thing cover to cover, but it can resonate with you differently if you actually care for it rather than just saying, oh, I possess a Bible, I have one. I really enjoyed this talk. I thought it was really interesting, and I love poetry, so Wendell Berry's poetry like weave throughout, so that really kind of struck a chord with me. I really liked how he brought up, or Davis brought up about his work about how you can't really read it in distraction, and I feel like that is kind of another approach to the Bible as well. You want to read it when you are, you're in a place to read it where there's not other things going on. And they also talk about how it can slow you down. And sometimes most of the time that's a real gift to be slowed down, whether it's poetry or the Bible itself. And then I also really liked their mention of silence. And I kind of connected that with the Bible, like how you can read it in silence and interpret it that way from that point of view, but also in nature as well with what Ellen Davis was talking about. I feel like nature is something that is silent, but we make it loud, like humans make it more loud and clustered. And I thought when you accept silence is when you can actually learn, which is kind of what Ellen Davis was talking about. And then I do want to leave with one quote about hope. It's actually from Wendell Berry, and I think it just kind of sums up the whole conversation that they have, or the podcast that Ellen has, and then includes Wendell's work in it. He says, when hope sets out on its desperate search for reasons, it can find them. And that kind of goes back with that other approach that I've been mentioning about the just general value and care of the world. When you have hope for the world and you value it, then that is how it'll actually change. And you can use the same thing with the Bible. If you have actual care and value for the Bible, then that's how you can read and interpret it.